أبدأ هنا في المحور الثالث.
And we'll now start with the
الكلمة
third part
لمكتب المبعوث
of
الأممي،
the
وأيضا
session, where
من
we will
خلال
hand
هذا
over the
الأمر
microphone to the Office of
بالأمس
the UN Special
فقط صدر
Envoy.
بيان من مكتب
Just
المبعوث
yesterday,
الأممي
the UN Special
يشير إلى
Envoy,
اعتقال ما لا
Office
يقل
of the
عن
UN Special
11
Envoy, issued a
موظف
statement on the
تابع
arrest
للأمم
of
المتحدة.
11
يعني فعلا نعلم أن
employees of UN
الاعتقالات والإخفاء
agencies
القسري وبقية
in
الانتهاكات
Yemen. We
تستخدم
know that
لضرب
enforced
داخليا وخارجيا
disappearance and detentions are used
لعدم
to
التطرق لهذا
pressure
الملف،
local
لعدم
and
التطرق لهذا الملف
international
بحزم
actors.
وتركه
And if
للتفاوض
this issue
السياسي
is not dealt with
ووكلاء الشعوب
decisively, and if it is left for the
بإمكانية
political
الفعل. ومن هنا
negotiations,
يأتي
then there will
الدور
be a
الحازم
continued
للأمم
sense of
المتحدة
impunity. And this is where
للوقوف
the
في
role
جانب
of the United
العدالة
Nations comes in,
وتمثيل
to
المصالح
stand alongside
الخاصة
justice
بالضحايا. ننتقل
and
إلى المحور
alongside the
الثالث
interests
مع
of the
كلمة
victims. And so we move on to the
كلمة مكتب
third
المبعوث الأممي
part of our
تقدمه
session,
الأستاذة شذى الحرازي.
the
تفضل
UN
أستاذة شذى.
Special Envoy's Office, presented by Shatha Al-Harazi. Over to you, Shatha.
شكرا جزيلا
Thank you very much,
على
Isa.
هذه الفرصة المهمة
Thank you for
وعلى
this
هذا
very
الحدث المهم.
important
مهم جدا في
opportunity
وقت
and for this
زخم
very
للحديث عن
important
العدالة
activity. I think
الانتقالية
it is
والمسائل المرتبطة بأمال
important to build
المجتمع
momentum for transitional justice and
وأمال
other issues
الضحايا
linked
في
to
مستقبل
the
أفضل.
hopes and aspirations of society as a
أنا
whole and of victims
الكلمة اللي كنت أبغى
specifically
أتحدث
for a better
فيها
future.
هي
What I
بناء
wanted
على
to
ما
speak
تم
about,
طرحه
and based on
والحديث المهم اللي
what has
طرحه
already been presented by
المتحدثين السابقين قبلي وخاصة
the
فيما يتعلق
panelists who have
بتجربة
spoken before
كولومبيا
me,
والدامجة
and
جده
specifically
هو
on the
كيف
Colombian
يمكن
experience,
فتح الطريق
is
نحو العدالة
how we can
الانتقالية.
try to open a
بناء على ما
path
ختم به
towards
السيد من
transitional
كلام
justice.
مهم
And
جدا
based
وهو
on
أنه
the conclusion of
العمل على العدالة
Sergio's
الانتقالية لابد
remarks,
أن يبدأ
that
الآن.
work on transitional
في ظل
justice needs to
الظروف هذه
start
وفي ظل
now, no
والكلام
matter
اللي
how
أنت
far
طرحته
things
بأنه
might seem.
تظل
And also
تتراكم
based on what you've
الانتهاكات
said,
تظل تتراكم
Isa, that these
شعور
violations, these
الأطراف
crimes
المختلفة
continue
بأنه
to accumulate. The
عبر
sense that the
الانتهاك
various parties to
يمكن
the
أنه
conflict have that through these
يتم التعامل مع
violations, through these
المجتمع وفي
crimes,
ظل عدم وجود
they will be able
أطر
to make
متفق
gains,
عليها
and that this is the way
لحماية
that they should
حقوق
deal with society. And without having
المواطنين
clear
بعمومهم
frameworks for the
جموع
protection of
الضحايا وأيضا
civilians, for the protection of
يظل الوضع
victims,
على ما هو عليه.
then the situation will continue as it
أنا
is,
أهم ما
if
لفتني
not
في
get much
التجربة
worse.
الكولومبية
One of the
هي
most insightful things
الفكرة اللي
I found
تحدث
from the
عنها سيرجيو
Colombian
هي بدء
experience is
التحضير
the point that
لأغلب جوانب
Sergio
العدالة
talked
الانتقالية
about,
من
that we
وقت
need to
مبكر.
begin
تحضير
preparations
المؤسسات،
for all of these
تحضير
aspects
الموارد اللازمة،
well in advance, to
تحضير الأطر
prepare the
القانونية،
institutions, prepare the
كيفية
necessary
إحضار
resources,
الضحايا
prepare the legal
إلى الطاولة.
frameworks,
كل هذا
think
العمل
about how we
يحتاج
can
إلى
ensure that victims'
جهود
voices are
مبكرة
heard on
ولا
the
يحدث بين
negotiations
يوم
table.
وليلة.
And this is something that
الحالة
requires
اليمنية طبعا
much
مختلف.
preparation and
في الحالة
efforts.
اليمنية
The
ضمن
situation in
الاعتقاد
Yemen, or the
الراسخ
context in
زي
Yemen,
معظم
is
الصراعات
different.
بأنه
Like many
العدالة
other
الانتقالية
conflicts,
يجب
people
أن تكون
continue to believe that
إحدى ملفات
transitional
المرحلة
justice
الانتقالية،
is one of the
أي
issues that
بعد
will be
أن يجتمع
discussed during the
الأطراف
transitional
على
or
طاولة مفاوضات
post-conflict
شاملة.
period, after the
وهو تسلسل
parties have
منطقي
already
لأنه
negotiated.
بالعادة
And this might make
تنفيذ العدالة
some rational
الانتقالية
sense, because
بكليتها
usually the
يتطلب إرادة
implementation
سياسية
of
جامعة
transitional
من
justice
أطراف
requires
الصراع، وهم الفكرة منها أنهم يبتغون
consensual
يهدفون إلى التحول من
political will,
الصراع إلى
and that
انتقال
it is going to be an
إلى
attempt to
قطيعة مع
transition
الوضع
from a
السابق
conflict
والانتهاكات اللي توالت مع الصراع
into
من
a
قبله،
new future
وإلى الوصول إلى
that does
حالة
not
فيها نوع من
repeat
الرضا
the cycles
والعدالة
of conflict, and
للضحايا
that
وللمجتمع
this will
ككل.
be able to
والأهم هو منع
achieve
تكرار هذه الانتهاكات. لكن
reassurances
الواقع
for
اليمني أن
society and for
الأطراف
victims.
لم تجتمع
But the
في طاولة
reality in Yemen is that the parties to the
تفاوض
conflict
شاملة
have not met
منذ
at a comprehensive
مفاوضات الكويت
negotiating tables
2016.
since the
إذن يصبح
negotiations in
السؤال كيف
Kuwait in
يمكن أن نفتح
2016.
الطريق أمام
And so
العدالة
the question
الانتقالية
now is,
وما
how can we
الذي يمكن
open up the
عمله
pathways
الآن؟
to transitional
هل
justice,
يمكن
and
البدء
what can be
باتخاذ
done now?
خطوات
Can we
ولو
start
بسيطة ولو
by taking
تمهيدية
steps,
تؤسس
even if very
العدالة
small steps,
حتى
that help
إذا
lay
ما
the
ذهب
groundwork
الأطراف إلى
for justice,
عملية
so
سلام
that when the
شاملة تكون
parties
هناك
to the
أرضية يتم
conflict
البناء
go to a
عليها؟
comprehensive
التجربة
political
الكولومبية
negotiations,
توضح
there
لنا
already
أنه
is a
متى ما
groundwork.
كان
And I
هناك
think the
إرادة
Colombian
سياسية
experience shows
يبدأ
us
العمل.
that whenever
إذن
there is a
يصبح من
political
المهم
will,
خلق
the
إرادة
work will
سياسية
start. And so it's important for us to
تتبنى
start
الجهود
taking
المبذولة
steps
من قبل
towards
منظمات المجتمع
building that
المدني
political will
ومن
by
قبل
adopting the
شبكات الضحايا
initiatives and
وغيرها
activities
وتدفع
of
نحو
victims
تحقيق العدالة
associations and civil
الانتقالية.
society
في
organizations,
الحقيقة في
and using them
السياق
to push
اليمني
towards the
مفهوم العدالة
implementation of
الانتقالية هو
transitional
مفهوم حديث.
justice. In the
بدأ
Yemeni
منذ
context,
الوزارة
transitional justice
الخارجية
is a
في
more modern
2016
concept. It started since the
ومنذ طرح هذا
GCC initiative in
المصطلح كان
2011.
له أمرين ملازمين
And since it was
يؤثران في
presented,
طريقة تقبل أو رفض أو
it has had
تعاطي
two
القوى
aspects
السياسية
that
له.
or factors that
أولا
impact
عكس
how it
كثير من
is
التجارب
accepted or
حيث
rejected
يكون
by the
الجلاد
political
واحد
actors.
ومحدد
And
والضحية
unlike
فئة
many other
معينة
cases
أو
where
مجتمع
the
محدد بحد
perpetrators
ذاته.
of the
crime are a very specific group, and the victims are the rest of society. But in Yemen, with the different cycles of conflict, every one of these rounds, the victims of the previous round become the perpetrators of the next round, and so on and so forth. And so discussions of the time frame that will be covered by transitional justice, when discussing the time frame of the transitional justice, each actor wants to exclude the time frame in which they were the perpetrators of these violations. And this is one of the first steps that will need to be taken taken in transitional justice in Yemen. And they try by hindering these discussions on the time frame to hinder the process as a whole. Secondly, the Yemeni political actors have used transitional justice as a means of political bargaining with the other political actors, and they have also used their media to try to instill this understanding. And this is why to many Yemenis and to maybe to the Yemeni public, that transitional justice is a tool to be used for revenge, or at least to stigmatize one of the other actors as having been the ones that committed the perpetration or perpetrated the violations. And so whenever the concept of transitional justice is brought up, the idea is that one side is going to be the perpetrator and the others are the victims. And even to translate the word justice in Yemen, of the fact that this aims to create justice for everyone and ensure that this is the only guarantee for all of us, that none of our rights will be violated, and that the transition in transitional justice means a transition to a new stage, one with a better future and sustainable peace. And so this takes us back to the question, should transitional justice wait until further notice? Should we wait until the warring parties go to comprehensive negotiations? Because transitional justice for its implementation requires a peaceful settlement, but there are steps that need to be taken now. We cannot postpone everything until then. And so we need to work towards building the political will starting now. How can we do this? Sergio spoke about the importance of how we use these concepts or the terminology, and how this can be give us the flexibility, and so that the actors do not feel that this is purposefully designed to target them. And also taking steps that everyone feels like they have an interest in. We need to turn those who are afraid of these steps into partners, and those who the groups that are afraid now are the decision makers. They are the ones who might include transitional justice in the negotiations or not. We at the United Nations, through all of the work that we do and all of our activities, are committed to transitional justice. Civil society is our main partner in this, and victims associations are also our partners in this. But if the political actors do not accept this, then this work will be very difficult, if not impossible. And so we need to turn those who are afraid of transitional justice into partners. And since every one of these actors was a victim at one point throughout Yemen's modern history, I think is an excellent entry point for us into this process. And with regards to transitional justice, there are two efforts that are not equal. There are the efforts with civil society, which is our core partner, as I've mentioned, in addition to the victims, to create a transitional justice process that is in line with society's aspirations and help lead to less politicized options. And civil society organizations have made significant strides in their perspectives and in the work that they do with society, as well as in the technical capacities in monitoring and documentation, or in their work in forming associations. But what is more important than this, and this is something that I always find interesting, is the ability of civil society organizations to work with all victims, regardless of who the perpetrator is. And so they've gone beyond the idea of that we should form a victims association because we are victims of the same perpetrator. We do not recognize the victims of others. But no, the victims have all come together and worked together because they recognize the suffering that they have all gone through, regardless of who the perpetrator is. And this is a very advanced step in my view. But without bridging this very fruitful efforts and a real political will that these perspectives will help design, then all of the work that civil society has done will be diminished over time. And so it's important for us to bridge between civil society organizations and their efforts and political actors on the scene. And this bridge will need to be taken and this work would need to be taken step by step, and it needs to start immediately. Just as people have started to accept the concept of victims and trying to find less contentious terms for this, we need to start working with what is possible, what steps that can be taken. And I would like to reiterate what the two panelists have said previously, that throughout all of these stages, victims must be central to it. Not because they will be beneficiaries from the outcomes of this process, but as designers and as planners for the process as a whole, to ensure that their voices are heard throughout all of the stages of the process. I believe that the biggest challenge pertaining to transitional justice now, or one of the biggest challenges, is if nothing happens, if no action is taken, if we believe that nothing can be resolved before everything is resolved at once. I think this is an incorrect understanding, and we need to correct it for ourselves and for the political actors. There are many issues that would need to be discussed from a technical perspective, from a human rights perspective, or even from a political perspective. And creating mechanisms for these discussions at an early stage is very important. It's important for us to try to find which steps might achieve a consensus. So, for example, discussions on reparations. What are reparations? What are its determinants? What are the factors and conditions for its implementation? And also, how can it be funded? There are many, many more victims in Yemen than any previous period, while at the same time the state has become weaker with less resources and more fragile. During the National Dialogue Conference, there were always very quick discussions over this topic, that the state would be the one to compensate. And the Yemeni state was very weak back then, and now it is even much weaker. And so these discussions are very important to try to come up with creative and innovative ideas. What are some of the examples from other experiences for reparations? That's a very important discussion. How can we start by documenting the victims? Why should we wait for a political process for us to document and create a victims registry? Can we start these discussions now? Even if there is already documentation by civil society organizations, if it is not politically acceptable, or if it is accused of being politicized or inaccurate, then all of this will go to waste. And so we need to have a discussion for how can we create mechanisms that are politically accepted, that recognize these efforts and build upon them, and that these are efforts that are supportive of the institutions that will operate in the future. We also need to discuss what these institutions will look like, what institutions or bodies need to be formed, what need to be reformed, and can this reform process start now with the lack of a comprehensive political agreement? And finally, I wanted to speak about the role of youth, women, and civil society organizations. Youth are the most important factor in all of this, because the Yemeni population, a majority of the Yemeni population are youth, and youth do not bear the burdens of the past and these conflicts from the past. And I think youth are better able to overcome political differences, and because they see that this future is a future that they will have to live through, and they aspire for a better future. And civil society can also contribute to designing different programs on this process relating to the discussions that we mentioned, including reparations and institutional reform that reflect local needs. And youth can lead these dialogues that do not focus on naming and blame, but ensure non-repetition. Dialogues that focus on justice through its true meaning, and not as a way in a way to try to recover, but more than anything else. And for these dialogues to focus on giving hope and not political point scoring. And this has been going on for a long time. There are whole media organizations and channels that the political actors use to accuse each other of being the perpetrator of these crimes, and we need to leave this cycle. And finally, we need to provide support these youth, not just through funding, but also by giving them the position to design this process. And like Bart said, the transitional justice process is not about victors and the defeated. It's about restoring dignity. It's about restoring trust in institutions and creating a future that is more safe and secure and dignified for everyone. Thank you all very much.